Welcome to another edition of Chasing Legends of the Superstition Mountains. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. Today we're going to talk about a story that happened probably something 14, 15 years ago. Could have been a little longer. Randy Wright and myself, Randy was my Dutch hunting partner at the time, and for many years we spent a significant amount of time in the mountains. And at this point we're up in the area of Bluff Springs Mountain. We were working around in Needle Canyon, and we wanted to we were looking up and down these various canyons. There was always the word of down by Williams Camp and various areas of Spanish mines. We knew where some of them were located, but we'd heard that there was a whole group of them along the base, that western face of Bluff Springs Canyon. We'd heard of some other spots, and we knew Barry Storm had actually had some claims in a camp up in there. So we wanted to kind of check these things out and kind of look over some of the history and see what we could find up in there. We'd found a number of different artifacts. We'd found a knife. We weren't finding the mineralization we were looking for. We were finding a lot of quartz. We were finding a lot, but we weren't finding much granite or iron in the general vicinity where we were looking. And these weren't really good hard rock mines. Most of them were tunneled out into into some soft material. There wasn't any timbering. They were like rat holes when we found them. So we're up there working our way up, and I remember it was a pretty narrow canyon, ravine, and it was getting steeper and steeper, and we got to a certain point, and I was probably 50 yards out in front of Randy, kind of cutting trail a bit. And there really didn't seem much of a way up out of there. I looked over and I saw a bit of a crevice, an area where I thought we could work our way literally straight up and kind of like try to crawl and get to the top of that area. Randy chose not to. He decided he was going to back down and go back out and kind of go around the other way and kind of see if there was another route up. So we kind of separated. There are some pictures I have at the time, because he did end up about probably a good quarter mile north of me. And we took pictures of each other, but I continued up the area I was going. I started wedging up this it was like a nice little chimney. The problem was, as I started to go up, it got steeper and steeper, and then there was a lot of loose material, nothing really to hold on to. And then it kept getting wider, getting towards the top, which made it worse. It was the opposite of what you'd want. And I was having a harder and harder time to get purchased, but I also realized I was probably about 30, 40 feet up this thing. And below me, it was all yuccas and stuff like that. I already put one through one of my joints in my left hand earlier, and that hand was pretty numb from it, so that wasn't helping things either. So I kind of worked and scrambled, and I do distinctly remember. And of course, Randy's way out of range. He can't hear me or anything, and I'm up in this chimney. And I was getting close and close. I was probably about 5 feet from the top, and I remember I could distinctly smell the smell of a skunk. And it puts that hesitation where you're kind of like, man, should I continue to go? Should I not? What am I going to do? So I finally decided just to push forward, and it was just pure, I just kept churning my legs and arms, and I literally felt like I wasn't moving anywhere. I was exhausting myself, inches, trying to work my way up this thing. It was just literally becoming harder and harder to get a purchase. But I finally got far enough up, I was able to kind of dump my upper body up and start pulling myself up. Fortunately, there was no skunk, and the smell dissipated, so chances are the skunk was below me, and I'd probably he'd come out of somewhere below me when I was making all this noise and kicking all these rocks down. So I got up to this area of purchase. I realized Randy's going to show up about a quarter mile north of me if he finds his way around. And I was kind of in an area I hadn't been before, and I was kind of looking around, and it was one of those things where you're like, man, why did I even do this? Because you're just drenched in sweat. Then I'm totally exhausted. And I started cutting around to my right, looking around, and there was a couple crows, and they kept flying and cawing by me. And I was kind of like looking over to see what they could be going on about. Didn't seem like there was any activity. We hadn't seen anybody all day. Start working, and there's these ledges, series of ledges that kind of worked off where you would go down, have to go down about 4 or 5 feet, and then 4 or 5 feet on another one. And they were kind of like a little bit like, not quite terraces, but kind of dropping down. So I'm looking at those, and I'm thinking, that's kind of neat. You don't really see them from below. And I kind of thought it was neat. And there were some larger sized boulders. And I know there was a couple different stories running through my head about teepee-sized boulders and this and that. So I started working my way up, and I realized on the end of this big system of boulders, just above this one terrace, I see this, looks like a triangle kind of like thing. And I have a picture somewhere of it. And I kind of took it, and I'm looking at it and thinking, well, that usually means the treasure's there or something. But you don't know who's done it if someone just didn't have, had too much time on their hands. So I'm looking at it, I step down, I see another triangle opening on something, like these boulders that are stacked. And I start looking at it, and I walk over and I look through it, and I'm looking, and I'm not really seeing anything distinct. I'm thinking, that's probably natural. And I remember as I did that, I turned to my left at that point, or right. I turned one way, and I look over, and I see this giant X. And it just goes through, and I'm like, wow. And I walked over and put my finger in it, and I was like, someone took some serious time to kind of put this X here. And I'm thinking of the sleeping squaw treasure and different stories. Maybe I'll tell that story sometime. But I'm thinking of these various stories I've heard about, and I realized the boulder formation kind of is like the sleeping squaw. And I look over to the right, and there's these grooves. It looks like almost like a calendar. And you can see it's all weathered. The rock's weathered, it's very old. And there's a hole, like another triangle up in the corner. And when you're seeing all this, you're just kind of sitting there trying to find the excuse to say, well, maybe it's just natural weathering, but none of the rock around it, there's nothing similar to it. And it's really well defined, and one's right next to the other. So I'm standing there, and then I look down, and I'm between this one large boulder. It looks like it's a flat line boulder. Like a huge table. And then between that and these other boulders that have the writing on them, I realize there's like a concaved area. And I'm looking at it, and I realize there's soil to the sides. It's probably a little, maybe 3-4 inches higher than everything else around it. But I'm looking at it, and it's that thing where your brain's telling you something's not quite right here. There's just something not fitting, It's the square peg, round hole type thing, but I don't know what it is. So I went over, sat down, I'm smoking a cigarette, I'm looking around, and I realize Randy's not going to come this way. I figure he's probably going to shoot north from where we would have met. So he's either going to hang out in that area or continue working his way north. So I'm going to have to catch up here shortly. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm just trying to look at this thing. And I remember, I was like, man, this is just kind of such a weird spot. I'd been through there many, many times, didn't realize this spot was there. And then I realized what it is that's bothering me is the actual, the soil that's displaced off to the side. There's no rocks or anything. It's the natural soil there, but there's no big boulders, nothing in it. But I realized it won't fill the hole in. And so I sat there and kind of worked out, if I put this much in, how much. So it would have been buried probably 4 or 5 inches below the surface of this area. But I realized there would have been, say, a good-sized box, probably 2 feet by 1 foot by maybe 8 inches high. And it was a kind of a rectangular shape that would have been in there and fit there. So it was obviously too late. So I'm working myself up because I'm thinking this is really cool, and probably one of the biggest mistakes we made at that time, though we corrected these things later. But I got up, took a few more pictures of the area, and started heading out to catch up with Randy. And so I shot across, kind of started hoofing it. I got probably about 25, 30 yards, and then I realized there was this rock that was about this big, and it was laying down in the dirt, and it was completely like a squared rock, and it had been worked, and the one surface of it was completely smooth flat. And then I moved it up, and I realized the other side was not quite as smooth, and it was very, there's cubic, you see stuff in nature that is squared, but it seemed very, very man-made. And then I kind of tilted it up and thought it felt like it could have been a marker, maybe not just a grave, because it had the tombstone look, but I was thinking this could have been some sort of marker. And I'm looking at the surface, took some pictures, poured some water on it to see if there's any markings. There's nothing. I realized Randy's getting further away. So I run. I catch up to Randy finally. He's taking pictures, standing off in the middle of nowhere. Snap, snap, snap. And I get up to him and I start showing him the photos. I'm like, you got to check this out, man. This is totally cool. This is totally cool. And he said, oh, I've seen that. Looks like natural weathering. Nah, I don't think it's anything. Well, when you're out, you trust each other. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe I got a little excited. I said, you really sure? Because this looks really good. And he's like, nah, I don't think, I'm not thinking it's much of anything. I'm like, okay, I'm like, I think we should go back and check it out more. But he's like, yeah, we already had our itinerary, what we wanted to do. We were running way behind. And we need to get back off and out of the down end of the canyon, probably within the next 3-4 hours. So I said, okay, I'll defer to you. Let's go down. And we continued the day doing what we were doing. We finished that day, and I've went through various treasure stories, and I've never found anything quite to match it with the markings in the area. But what became very, very interesting is it's like 3-4 months later, and I posted a couple pictures of it, and it was just kind of like a series of photos, and I've posted them before in the past. And the first person I hear from is I see my phone's ringing. Oh, it's Randy. And Randy's like, holy shit, dude, where was that at? And I'm like, what do you mean? That was. And he's like, no. What's that all about? And now he's totally into it. So he's like, no, I would have went back. Yeah. So it goes to show you sometimes your brain maybe isn't processing in the right place at the time. And he probably had something else going in his head. Later, we kind of put more attention to it. I've always wanted to go back and really address the area because we never physically found anything in the area other than the markings and the hole that someone else had been there. But that was probably easily 2005, 2006, I would think, or earlier. And it was one of those really interesting discoveries we made that showed, sometimes X does mark the spot, and sometimes you get lucky, but nothing's there. So I've never heard of anybody bringing anything out. I've never heard a story of what it could have been or anything I could quite tie into it. But it was probably one of those more interesting discoveries that always makes me scratch my head. And even today, I always wonder is what made me want to go up that chimney, down over that hill, and head right straight for that spot. I mean, I'm not kidding. I literally walked straight up on it like there was something in the back of my head that was trying to tell me, you need to walk over here and check this out. But have other photos of some of the area and stuff, and maybe someday I'll post some of that and all without giving the site away, because I don't want anything. The unfortunate aspect is people go out and they start to just kind of mark these things and do things and destroy those things. And I believe it to be very old. Interesting story. I mean, sometimes the treasure's not there, and that sometimes happens. So, hey, you know what? Hit like if you like. If you're one of those people that doesn't like us and thinks we're fat and old and wants to leave a comment, hey, we're fine with that. We'll like your comment even then too. So, you know what? Just hit like regardless, and then you can diss us off, and then hit subscribe even. And give us some support and a little bit of love there. And we'll see what we bring you next week on Chasing Legends of the Superstition Mountains.